Chapman's Homer, book 16. The Death of Patroclus. And this is it. This is where Achilles' stubbornness ultimately destroys the life of his friend. I mean, there is the reputation that he's more than that amongst a certain tract of classicists. They are not the tract who are genuinely studying the classics as a civilization in their proper form. They're studying the classics in the blind, blinkered view of their own lifetime. That's not the way you view the classics. You view the classics as a whole civilization. Nevertheless, that is an aside to the raw emotion which should be felt in this book. 16th book, Homer's Iliad. Here is Chapman's argument. Achilles at Patroclus' suit doth yield, his arms and myrmidons, which brought to field. To Trojans fly, Patroclus hath the grace of great Sarpedon's death sprung of the race. Of Jupiter, he having slain the horse of Thetis' son, fierce Pedasus the force of Hector doth revenge the much rude end of most renowned Sarpedon on the friend of Thetis, first of Euphorbus harmed, and by Apollo's personal power disarmed. On Patroclus bears the chance of death imposed by Hector's lance. Thus, fighting for this well-built ship, Patroclus all that space stood by his friend, preparing words to win the Greeks his grace, with power of uncontained tears, and like a fountain poured in black streams from a lofty rock, the Greeks so plague deplored. Achilles, ruthful for his tears, said, "Wherefore weeps my friend, so like a girl, who, though he sees her mother cannot tend her childish humours, hangs on her, and will be taken up still with viewing her with tears drowned eyes, and she hath made her stoop to nothing like her I can shape by so unseemly tears. What causeth them? Hath any ill solicited thine ears befallen on my myrmidons, or news from loved Pythia brought, told only thee, lest I should grieve, and therefore thus hath wrought on thy kind spirit? Actor's son, the good Menetius, thy father lives in Peleus, mine, great son of Aeacus, amongst the Myrmidons, whose deaths and duty we should mourn. Or is it what the Greeks sustain, that doth thy stomach turn, on whom for their injustice' sake plagues are so unjustly laid? Speak, man, let both know either's heart. Patroclus sighing said, Peleus' son, thou strongest Greek by all degrees that lives, still be not angry or sad state such cause of pity gives. Our greatest Greeks lie at their ships, sore wounded Ithacus, King Agamemnon, Diomed, good Eurypylus. These much medicine-knowing men, physicians can rescue, thou yet unmedicinable still, though thy wound all endure. Heaven bless my bosom from such wrath as thou suit'st as thy bliss, unprofitably virtuous. How shall our progenies, born in thine age, enjoy thine aid, when these friends in thy flower thou leav'st to such unworthy death, O idle, cruel power? Great Peleus never did beget, nor Thetis bring forth thee. Thou from the blue sea and her rocks driv'st thy pedigree. What so declines thee? If thy mind shuns any augury, related to be thy mother queen from heaven's foreseeing eye, and therefore thou forsakest thy friends, let me go, ease their moans. Those brave relics of our host, thy mighty Myrmidons, that I may bring to field more light to conquest than hath been, to which end grace me with thine arms, since any shadow seen of thy resemblance, all the power of perjured Troy will fly. And our so tired friends will breathe our fresh set on supply, will easily drive off their wearied oar. Thus foolish man he sued, for his short death of all whose speech Achilles first renewed, the last part thus: worthy friend, have thy speeches been, I shun to fight for oracles. What my mother queen hath told from Jove, I take no care nor note of one such thing, but this fit anger stings me still. The insulting king should from his equal take his right, since he exceeds in power. This still his wrong is still my grief. He took my paramour, that all men gave, and whom I won by virtue of my spear, that for her overturned a town. This rape he made of her, and he used me like a fugitive, inmate in a town that is no city libertine, nor capable of their gown. But bear we this, as out of date his past, nor must we still feed anger in our noblest parts. Yet thus I have my will, as well as our great king, the king of men. For I did ever vow never to cast off my disdain, till, as it falls out now, there miss me not at my feet, till me in their cries I was revenged, and had my wish of all my enemies. So of this repeat enough. Take thou my fame-blazed arms, and my first thirsty myrmidons lead to these hot alarms. Whole clouds of Trojans circle us with hateful eminence, the Greeks shut in a little shore, a sort of citizens, skipping upon them, all because their proud eyes do not see the radiance of my helmet there, whose beams had instantly thrust back, and all the ditches filled with carrion of their flesh. If Agamemnon had been kind, where now they fight as fresh, as thus far they had put at ease, and at our tents contend, and may for repulsive hand of Diomed doth not spend his raging darts there, at their could fright out of their fleet, for from not that of heavy head of enmity can my poor heroes meet. The voice of great Atreides now Hector's only voice, breaks all the air about both hosts, and with the very noise, bred by loud encouragements, his force fill the field, and fight the poor Achaeans down. But on put thou my shield, betwixt the fire plague and our fleet, rush bravely on, and turnwards tide as headlong on their throats. No more let them adjourn our sweet home turning, but observe the charge I lay on thee, to each least point that thy ruled hand may highly honour me, and get such glory from the Greeks that they may send again my most sweet wench. Gift to boost, when thou hast cast a rein on these so headstrong citizens, and forced them from our fleet, with which grace, if the god of sound thy kind aggression greet, retire. Be not tempted on with pride to see thy hand rain slaughtered carcasses on earth, to run forth by command as far as Iliad, lest the gods that favour Troy come forth to thy encounter, for the sun much loves it, and my worth in what thou sufferest will be strong, and that I would let my friend assume an action of such weight without me, and transcend his friend's prescription, do not affect a further fight than I may strengthen. Let the rest, when thou hast done his right, perform the rest. Would to Jove, thou Pallas, and thou sun, that not a man housed underneath those towers of Ilion, nor any one of all the Greeks, how infinite a sum soever altogether might live unovercome. But only we two, scraping death, might have that thunder down of every stone stuck in the walls of this so sacred town. Thus spake they only twixt themselves, and now the foe no more could Ajax stand, being so oppressed with all the iron store the Trojans poured on, whose darts and with Jove's will beside his powers were cloyed, and his bright helm did deafening blows abide. His plume and all bead ornaments could never hang in rest. His arm yet laboured up his shield, and having done their best, they could not stir him from his stand, although he wrought it out with short respirings, and with sweat that ceaseless flowed about, his reeking limbs no least time given to take in any breath, ill-strengthened, ill. When one was up, another was beneath. Now, muses, you that dwell in heaven, the dreaded mean inspire, that first enforced the Grecian fleet to take in Trojan fire. First, Hector, with his huge broad sword, cut off at setting on the head of Ajax's ashen lance, which Ajax seeing gone, and that he shook a headless spear a little while unaware. His weary spirits told him straight the hand of heaven was there, trembling under his conceit, 'twas Jove's deed, who as be pulled off his dart's head, so sure he had decreed that all the counsels of their war he would pull off like it, and give the Trojans victory. So trusted he his wit, and left his darts, and then the ship was heaped with horrid bands of kindling fire, which instantly was seen through all the strands in unextinguishable flames that all the ship embraced. And then Achilles beat his thighs and cried out, Patroclus, haste. Make thy way with horse, as see it fleet a fire of fearful rage. So arm, lest all our fleet it fire and all our power engage. Arm quickly, I'll bring up the troops. To these so dreadful wars Patroclus in Achilles' arms enlightened all with stars, and richly ammelled all haste made. He wore his sword, his shield, his plume, huge plumed helm, 2 such spears as he could nimbly wield. But the most famed Achilles' spear, big, solid, full of weight, he only left of all his arms. For that far past the might of any Greek to shake, but his, Achilles, only ire shook that huge weapon. That was given by Chiron to his sire, cut from the top of Pelion, to be his hero's death, his steed's automaton, straight joined, like whom no man that breathes next Peleus' son, Patroclus loved, for like him none so great he found in faith at every fight, nor out to luck a threat. Automedon did therefore guide for him Achilles' steeds, Xanthias and Balius, swift as wind, begotten by the seeds of Zephyr, and harpy-born Pedage, in a mead whose close to the wavy ocean, where the fierce harpy fed. Automedon joined these before, and with the hindmost gears he fastened famous Pedasus, whom from the massacres made by Achilles when he took Eetion's wealthy town, he brought through a mortal race, yet gave him the renown to follow his immortal horse. And now before his tents himself had seen his myrmidons in all habiliments of dreadful war, and when ye see upon a mountain bred a den of wolves, about whose hearts unmeasured strengths are fed, new come from curry of a stag, their jaws all blood besmeared. And when from the some black water fount they all together heard, there having plentifully lapped, with thin and thrust out tongues, the top and clearest of the spring go belching from their lungs, the clotted gore, look dreadfully and entertain no dread, their bellies gaunt all taken up, and being so rawly fed, and then say, as such in strength and look, what great Achilles' men, now ordered for the dreadful fight, and so with all them then, their princes and their chiefs did show, about the general's friend, his friend, and all about himself, who chiefly did intend the embattling of horse and foot. That siege held so long, 25 sail he brought, 25 strong. Of able men was every sail, 5 colonels he made. Of all these forces, trusty men, and all of power to lead, but he of power beyond them all, Menesthius was one, that ever wore discolored arms. He was a river's son, that fell from heaven. Good to drink was his delightful stream. His name was unwearied Spercheius. He loved the lovely dame, fair Polydora, Pelesius' seed, and dear in Boris' sight. And she that celestial flood gave this Menesthius light, a woman mixing with a god. Yet Boris bore the name of father to Menesthius, he marrying the dame, and giving her a mighty dower. He was the kind descent of Periedes. The next man renowned with regiment was strong Eudorus, brought to life by one supposed maid, bright Polymela, Phyllis' seed, that had the wanton played with Argus, killing Mercury, who fired with her fair eyes, as she was singing in the choir of her that makes the cries, clamorous hunting, and doth bear the crooked bow of gold. Stole to her bed in that chaste room that Phoebe chaste did hold. Gave her that swift warlike son, Eudorus, brought to light as she was dancing. But as soon as she that rules the plight of labouring women eased her throes, and showed her son the sun, strong Achicaeus, actors there, wooed earnestly and won her second favour, feeing her with gifts of infinite prize, and after brought her to his house, where in his grandsire's eyes old Phylas, Polymela's son, obtained exceeding grace, found his careful bringing up, as of his natural race he had descended. The third chief was fair, my lady's, Pisandrus, who in skill of darts obtained supremest praise of all the Myrmidons except their lord's companion. The fourth charge aged Phoenix led, and the fifth Alcimedon, son of Laerces, and much famed all these digested thus in fit place by the mighty son of royal Peleus. This stern remembrance he gave all. You Myrmidons, said he, lest any of you should forget his threatenings used to me in this place and through all time, that my just angered reign, attempting me with bitter words for being so restrained, for my hot humour from the fight, remember them as these, thou cruel son of Peleus, whom she that rules the seas did only nourish with her gall, thou dost ungently hold. Our hands against our wills from fight we will not be controlled, but take our ships and sail for home, before we loiter here and feed thy fury. These high words exceeding often were the threats that in your mutinous troops ye used to me for wrath, and be disdained so from the field. Now then your spleens may bathe in sweat of those great works ye wished. Now he that can employ a generous heart go fight and fright these bragging sons of Troy. This set their minds and strengths on fire, the speech enforcing well being used in time, but being their kings it much more did impel, and closer rushed in all their troops. And as for buildings high, the masons laid his stone more thick against the extremity of wind and weather, and even then in any storm arise, he thickens them with more for that. The present act so plies his honest mind to make sure work, so for the high estate his work was brought to these men's minds according to the rate, well raised and all their bodies joined, but their well-spoken king, with his so timely thought on speech more sharp, made valor's sting, and thickened so their targets bossed. So all their helmets then, that shields propped shields, that helmets knocked, and men encouraged men. Patroclus and Automedon did arm before them all, two bodies with one mind informed. Then the general betook him to his private tent, where from a coffer wrought most rich and curiously, and given by Thetis to be brought, in his own ship, top filled with vests, warm robes to check cold wind, and tapestries all golden fringed and curled, with thumbs behind. He took a most unvalued bowl, in which none drank but he, nor he but to the deities, nor any deity, but Jove himself was served with that, and that he first did cleanse with sulphur, then with fluences of sweetest water wrens. Then washed his hands, and drew himself a mighty bowl of wine, which standing midst the place enclosed for services divine, and looking up to heaven and Jove, who saw him well, he poured upon the place of sacrifice, and humbly thus implored, Great Dodenius, president of the Dodone's towers, divine Pelasgius, dwellest far hence, about whose bowers the austere prophetic Selli dwell, that still sleep on the ground, go bare and never cleanse their feet, as I before have found. Grace to my vows and hurt to Greece. So now my prayers intend, I still stay in the gathered fleet, but have dismissed my friend amongst my many Myrmidons to danger of the dart. Grant his valor, my renown arm with my mind his heart. That Hector's self may know my friend can work in single war, and not then only show his hand so hot and singular, when my kind present seconds him, but fight he ne'er so well. No further let him trust his fight, but when he shall repel clamour and danger from our fleet, vouchsafe a safe retreat to him and all his company, with fames and arms complete. He prayed, and heaven's great counselor gave satisfying ear to one part of his orisons. One part. Let the other there. He let him free the fleet of foes, but safe retreat denied. Achilles left that other part, where he his zeal applied, and turned into his inner tent, made fast his cup, and then stood forth, and with his mind beheld the foes fight, and his men that followed his great-minded friend in battle, till they break with gallant spirit upon the foe, and as fell wasps that make their dwellings in the broad highway, which foolish children use, their cottages being near their nests, to anger and abuse, with ever vexing them and breed to soothe their childish war, a common ill to many men, since if a traveller that with his journey's end apply and pass them unassayed, come near and vex them, upon him the children's faults are laid. For on they fly, he was such, and still defend their own, so far, with the fervent mind of every Myrmidon, who poured themselves out of their fleet upon their wanton foes, that needs would stir them thrust so near, and cause the overthrows of many others, that had else been never so touched by them, nor would have touched. Patroclus then put up his wind to the stream, and thus extorted, now, my friends, remember you express, you late urged virtue, and renown our great Eacides, that he being strongest of all the Greeks, his eminence may dim all others likewise in our strengths that far off imitate him. Agamemnon now may see his fault as general as his place high, dishonouring him that so much honours all. Thus made he sparkle their fresh fire, and on they rushed the fleet. Filled full her hollow sides with sounds that terribly did greet the amazed Trojans, and their eyes did second their amaze. When great Menetius' son they saw, and his friends' armour blaze, all troops stood troubled with conceit that Peleus' son was there. His anger cast off at the ships, and each looked everywhere for some authority to lead, and then prepared to fight. Patroclus greeted with a lance the region where the fight made strongest tumult. Near the ship Protesilaus bought, and struck Pyrrhicmen, who before the fair-helmed peons fought, led from Amydon, near whose walls a broad-streamed Axius flows. Through his right shoulder flew the dart, and blow struck all the blows. In his power from his powerless arm, and down he groaning fell. His men all flying, their leader fled. This one dart did repel the whole guard placed about the ship, whose fire extinct half burned the peons left her, and full cry to the clamorous flight returned. Then spread the Greeks about their ships. Triumphant. Tumult flowed. And as from the top of some steep hill the lightness stripes a cloud, and lets a great sky out from heaven, in whose delightsome light all prominent foreheads, forests, towers, and temples cheer the sight, so cheered the Greeks this Trojan cloud, and at their ships and tents obtained a little from to breathe, but found no present vents to their inclusions, nor did Troy, though these Paeonians fled, lose any ground, but from this ship they needfully turned head. Then every man a man subdued. Patroclus in the thigh struck Eurylochus. His dart the bone did break and fly quite through, and sunk into the heart of earth. Good Menelaus slew accomplished Thoas, in whose breast, being naked, his lance he threw above his shield, and freed his soul. Philides, taking note, that bold Amphiclus spent at him, prevented him, and smote his thigh's extreme part, where of man his fattest muscle lies. The nerves torn with his lance's pile, and darkness closed his eye. Antilochus Antimnius is seized. His steel lance did impress his first three guts, and loosed his life at young Nestorides. Maris Antimnius brother flew, and at him Thrasimede, the brother of Antilochus's eager javelin's head, the muscles of his arm cut out, and shivered all the bone, nigh closed his eyes. His lifeless corse his brother fell upon, and so by two kind brothers' hands did two kind brothers bleed. Both being divine Sarpedon's friends, and while the darting seed of Amisodorus, that kept the bane of many men abhorred Chimera. Such bane now caught his children, and Iliades did take Cleobulus alive, invading him stayed by the press, and at him let them drive with his short sword that cut his neck, whose blood warmed all the steel, and cold death with a violence fate his sable eyes did seal. Peneleus and Lycon cast together off their darts, both missed, and both together then went with their swords in parts. The blade and hilt went laying on upon the helmet's sight. Peneleus' sword caught Lycon's neck and cut it through quite. His head hung by the very skin, the swift Meriones, pursuing flying Acamas. Just as he got access to horse and chariot, overtook and took him such a blow on his right shoulder that he left his chariot and did strow the dusty earth. Life left his limbs, and night his eyes possessed. Idomeneus his stern dart at Eremus addressed. As like to Acamas he fled, it cut the sundry bones beneath his brain twixt his neck and foreparts, and so runs, shaking his teeth out through his mouth, his eyes all drowned in blood, So through his nostrils and his mouth that now dart open stod, he breathed his spirit, thus had death from every Grecian chief, a chief of Troy. For as to kids or lambs their cruel thief, the wolf seals in, and when he sees that by the shepherd's slaught the dams are dispersed about the hills, then serves his ravenous tooth with ease, because his prey is weak. So served the Greeks their foes, discerning well how shrieking flight did all their spirits dispose, their biding virtues quite forgot, and now the natural spleen that Ajax bore to Hector still by all means would have been within his bosom with a dart, but he that knew the war, well covered, and a well-lined shield did well perceive how far the arrows and the javelins reached, by being within their sounds and ominous singings, and observed their inclining bounds of conquest. In her aid of him, and so abated change, took safest course for him and his, and stood her to her as strange. And whereas when Jove intends a storm, he lets out of the stars from steep Olympus a black cloud that all heaven's splendor bars from men on earth, so from the hearts of all the Trojan host all comfort lately found from Jove in flight and cries was lost. Nor made they any fair retreat. Hector's unruly horse would needs retire him, and he left engaged his Trojan force. Forced by the steepness of the dike that in ill place they took, and kept them that would fain have gone. Their horses quite forsook a number of the Trojan kings, and left them in the dike their chariots. In their 14 broke, and Patroclus then did stride. While steel was hot, cheered his friends, nor meant his enemies good, who, when they once began to fly, each way received a flood, and choked themselves with drifts of dust. Now were clouds begot. Beneath the clouds, with flight and noise, the horse neglected not their home intendments, and while rout was busiest, there poured on Patroclus most exhorts and threats. And then lay overthrown numbers beneath their axle trees, who in lying fleet streams made thereafter chariots jot and jump, and driving over them the immortal horse Patroclus rode did pass the dike with ease, and wished the depth and danger more, and Miniatiades as great a spirit into the reach retiring Hector's haste, but his fleet horse had much law, fetched him off too fast. As in autumn the black earth is loaden with the storms that Jove in gluts of rain pours on, being angry with the forms of judgment in authorized men, that in their courts maintain with violent office wrested laws, and fearing gods nor men, exile all justice, for whose fault whole fields are overflown, and many valleys cut away with torrents headlong thrown from neighbor mountains, till the sea receive in roaring in the judge of men's labors, then are vain plagued for their judge's sin. So now, foul defaults. Some old Troys were laid upon, so like those torrents roared they back to windy Iliad. So like tempests blew the horse, with ravishing back again those hot assailants, all their works at fleet now rendered vain. Patroclus, when he had dispersed the foremost phalanxes, called back his forces to the fleet, and would not let them breeze, as they desired too near the town betwixt the ships and flood, and their steeper empire his hands steeped revenge in seas of blood. Then Pronus was first that fell beneath his fiery lance, which struck his bare breast near his shield, the second Hestor's chance. Old Enopus' son did make himself, who shrinking and set close in his fair seat, even with the approach Patroclus made, did lose all manly courage, insomuch that from his hands his reins fell, flowing down, and his right jaw Patroclus' lance attains, struck through his teeth, and there it stuck. By to him drew dead Hector to his chariot, and showed, as when you view the angler from some prominent rock draw with his line and hook a mighty fish out of the sea, so the Greeks did pluck the Trojans gaping from his seat, his jaws oped with the dart, with which when Patroclus drew he fell, his life and breast did part. Then rushed he on Euryalus, at whom he hurled a stone which strake his head, so in the midst that two was made of one. 2 ways it fell, cleft through his casque, and then Tlepolemus, Epaltes, Demastorides, Evipus, Echius, Epheus, bold, Amphoterus, and valiant Aramis, and Polymulus, by his sire, surnamed Agiares. He heaped upon the much-fed earth when Jove's most worthy son, divine Sarpedon, saw these friends thus stayed and others run. "For shame! Why fly ye?" Then he cried. "Now show ye fleet, and now, on keep your way, myself will meet the man that startles you. To make me understand his name that flaunts in conquest thus, and hath so many able knees, so soon dissolved to us." Down jumped he from his chariot, down leaped his foe as light, and as on some far-looking rock a cast of vultures fight, fly on each other, strike and trust, part, meet, then strike and stick by, tug both with crooked beaks, and seers cry, fight and cry, and fight and cry. So fiercely fought these angry kings, showed as bitter galls, Jove turning his eyes to the stern fight his wife and sister calls, and how much move for the Lycian prince that said, "Or that to my son fate by this day in man should cut a thread so nobly spun, 2 minds distract me if I should now ravish him from fight and set him safe in Lycia, or give the fates their right." "Austere Saturnius," she replied, "what unjust words are these? A mortal long since marked by fate wouldst thou immortalize? Do, but by no god be approved. Free him and numbers more, sons of immortals, will live free, that death must taste before these gates of Ilion. Every god will have his son a god, or storm extremely. Give him then an honest period. In brave fight by Patroclus' sword, he be dear to thee and grieves thee for his dangerous life, of which when he is free, let death and somnus bear him thence, till Lycia's natural womb receive him from the brothers' hands and citizens' a tomb, and column raised to him. This is the honor of the dead." She said, and her speech ruled his power. But in his safety's stead, for sad ostent of his near death, he steeped his living name in drops of blood, and heaven's sweat for him which earth drunk to his fame. And now as this high combat grew, to this too humble end, Sarpedon's death had this state more. 'Twas ushered by his friend, charioteer brave Thrasimede, whom in his belly's rim Patroclus wounded with his lance, and endless ended him. And then another act of name for his princely fate. His first lance missing, he let fly a second that gave date of violent death to Pedasus, who, as he joyed to die by his so honourable hand, did even in dying nay. His ruin startled the other steeds. The gears cracked and the reins strappled his fellows, whose misrule Automedon restrains by cutting the entangling gears and so dissundering quite the brave slain beast, when both the rest obeyed and went for right. And then the royal combatants fought for the final stroke. Lycia's general missed again. His high-raised javelin took above his shoulder empty way, but no such speedless flight. Patroclus let his spear perform, that on the breast did light of his brave foe, where life strings close about the solid heart, impressing a recurless wound. His knees then left their part, and let him fall when, like an oak, a poplar, or a pine, new felled by artsmen on the hills, he stretched his form divine before his horse and chariot, and as a lion leaps upon a goodly yellow bull, drives all the herd in heaps, and under his unconquered jaws the brave beast sighing dies. So sighed Sarpedon underneath this prince of enemies, called Glaucus to him, his dear friend, and said, "Now, friends, thy hands much duty owe to fight in arms, now for my love it stands. Thy heart in much hand to approve that war is harmful. Now, how active all thy forces are, this 1 hour's act must show. First call our Lycian captains up, look round and bring up all, and all to exhort to stand like friends about Sarpedon's fall. And spend thyself thy steel for me, be sure no day of all thy life, thy last hour, can clear thy black dismay in woe and infamy for me, if I be taken hence spoiled of mine arms. Thy renown despoiled of my defence. Stand firm then, and confirm thy men." This said, the bounds of death concluded all sights to his eyes, to his nostrils, breathe. Patroclus, though his guard was strong, forced way through every doubt, climbed his high bosom with his foot, and plucked his javelin out, and withdrew the film and strings of his yet painting heart, and last together with the pile his princely soul did part. His horse spoiled both of guide and king, thick snoring and amazed, apt to flight, the Myrmidons made nimbly to and seized. Glaucus, to hear his friends ask aid of him, past all the rest. Though well he knew his wound uncurred, confusion filled his breast, not to have good in any power, and yet so much good will. And laying his hand upon his wound, that pained him sharply still, and was by choice's hand set on from their assailed steep wall, in keeping her from other men, he did on Phoebus call. God of medicines for cure, thou king of cures, said he, art perhaps in Lycia with her rich progeny, or here in Troy, but anywhere since thou hast power to hear, or give a hurt and woeful man as I am now, thine ear. This arm sustains a cruel wound, whose pains shoot everywhere, afflict this shoulder and this hand, and nothing long can stay, a flux of blood still issuing, nor therefore can I stand with any enemy of fight, nor hardly make my stand. Support my lance, and here lies Death, the worthiest of men, Sarpedon, worthy son to Jove, whose power could yet abstain from all aid in this deadly need. Give thou then aid to me, O king of all aid to men hurt, assuage the extremity. This arm's anguish, give it strength. By my precedence I may excite my men to blows, and this dead course prevent of further violence. He prayed, and kind Apollo heard. Allayed, his anguish and his wound of all the black blood cleared that vexed it so, infused fresh powers into his weakened mind, and all his spirits flowed with joy that Phoebus stood inclined in such quick bounty to his prayers. Then, as Sarpedon willed, he cast about his greedy eye, and first of all instilled to all his captains all the stings that could inflame their fight, for good Sarpedon. And from them he stretched his speedy pace, Tagenor, Hector, Venus' son, and wise Polydamas, and, only naming Hector, said, Hector, you no forget your poor auxiliary friends that in your toils have sweat their friendless souls out far from home. Sarpedon thus sustained with justice, and his virtues all broad Lycia hath not gained the like guard of his person here, for yonder dead he lies, beneath the great Patroclus' lance. But come, let your supplies, good friends, stand near him, or disdain to see his course defiled with Grecian fury, and his arms by their oppression spoiled. These Myrmidons are come and ranged. Such a mighty boot of Greeks Troy's darts have made a fleet. This said, from head to foot. Grief struck the powers past patience, and not to be restrained to hear news of Sarpedon's death, who, though he appertained to other cities, yet to theirs he was the very fort, and led a mighty people there, of all whose better sort himself was best. This made them run in flames upon the foe. First man, Hector, to whose heart Sarpedon did go. Patroclus, stir the Grecian spirits, and first the Iases thus. Now, brothers, be it dear to you to fight and succour us, as ever heretofore ye did with men first excellent. The man lies slain, that first did scale and raise the battlement that crowned our wall, the Lycian prince. But if we now shall add force to his course, and spoil his arms, a prize may more be had of many great ones that for him will put on to the death. To this work these were prompt enough, and each side ordereth those phalanxes that most had rate the resolutions, the Trojans and the Lycian powers, the Greeks and Myrmidons. These ran together for the course, and closed with horrid cries, their armours thundering with the claps laid on about the prize. And Jove about the impetuous broil pernicious night poured out, as long as for his loved son pernicious labour fought. The first of Troy, the Greeks foiled, when not the last, indeed, amongst the Myrmidons was slain, the great Agaclius' seed, divine Epicius, that before hath exercised command in fair Budeus. But because he laid a bloody hand on his own sister's valiant son, Peleus, and his queen, he became for pardon, and obtained his slaughters, being the mean. He came to Troy, and so to this. He ventured even to touch princely carcass, when a stone did more to him by much, sent out of able Hector's hand. It cut his skull in twain, struck him dead. Patroclus grieved to see his friend so slain before the foremost thrust himself, as a falcon frays a flock. Stares or caddises, such fear brought tis essays amongst the Trojans and their friends, and angry at the heart, as well as grieved for him so slain another stony dart. As good as Hector's he let fly that dusted in the neck of Sthenelaus, thrust his head to earth first, and did break the nerves in sunder with his fall. Off fell the Trojans too, even Hector's self, and all as far as any man can throw, provoked for games, or in the wars to shed any man's soul. A light long dart, the first that thundered, as he what that did control the targeteers of Lycia, Prince Glaucus, who to hell sent Patroclus, Calchon's son. Now he did in Hellas dwell, and shined for wealth and happiness amongst the Myrmidons. His bosom's midst the javelin struck, his fall gat earth with groans, the Greeks grieved and the Trojans joyed. For so renowned a man, about whom stood the Grecians firm, and then the death began on Troy's side by Meriones. He slew one great in war, Laogonus, Anato's son, the priest of Jupiter, created in the Iliad hill. Twixt his jaw and ear the dart stuck fast, and loosed his soul, sad mists of hate and fear invading him. Anchises' son dispatched a brazen lance at bold Meriones, and hoped to make an equal chance on him that bold Laogonus, though under his broad shield he lay so close, but he discerned and made his body yield so low that over him it flew, and trembling to the ground, with which Mars made it quench his thirst. And since he head could wound no better body, and yet thrown me ne'er the worse a hand, it turned from earth and looked to Ori. Aeneas, he let it stand, much angry at the vain event, and told Meriones he scaped but hardly, nor had cause to hope for such success another time. For well he knew his dancing faculty, by whose agility he escaped, for had his dart gone by with any least touch, instantly he had been ever slain. He answered, though thy strength be good, it cannot render vain the strength of others with thy jests, nor art thou so divine. But when my lance shall touch at thee with equal speed to thine, death will share with it thy life's powers. Thy confidence can shun no more than mine with his right claims. Menetius' noble son rebuked Meriones and said, what needs thou use for this? Thy strength is approved with words, good friend, nor can we reach the body, nor make the enemy yield with these our counter-braves. We must enforce the binding earth, to hold them in her graves. If you will war, fight. Will you speak? Give counsel. Counsel blows. Are the ends of wars and words? Talk here. Talk. Time in vain bestows. He said and led. Nothing less for anything he said, his speech being seasoned with such right, the worthy seconded. And then, as in a sounding vale near neighbour to a hill, would fellows make a far-heard noise, with chopping still, laying on blocks and trees, so they on men laid load, and beat like noises into air, both as they struck and trode. But past their noise, so full of blood, of dust, of darts, they smit divine Sarpedon, that with a man must have an excellent wit, that could not know him, but might fail, so from his utmost head, even to the low plants of his fleet, his form was altered, all thrusting near it every way, as thick as flies in spring, that in a sheep-cote when new milk assembles them might wing, and buzz about the top-full pails, nor ever was the eye of Jove averted from the fight. He viewed, though he had thought ceaselessly and diversely upon death of great Achilles' friend. Hector there to wreck his son should with his javelin end his life, and force his way his arms, or still augment the field. He then concluded that the flight of much more soul should yield Achilles' god friend more renown, and that even to their gates he should drive Hector and his host, and so disanimates the mind of Hector, that he mounts his chariot, takes flight up with him, taking all to her, affirming is in sight, knew evidently that the beam of Jove's all-ordering skulls was then in sinking on their side, surcharged with flocks of souls. But not the noblest Lycian stayed, but left their slaughtered lord amongst the courser's common heap, for many more were poured about and on him, while Jove's hand held out the bitter broil. And now they spoiled Sarpedon's arms, and to the ships the spoil was sent by Menethriades. Then Jove thus charged the sun: Haste, honoured Phoebus, let no more Greek violence be done to my Sarpedon. But his course of all the sable blood and javelins purged, then carry him far hence to some clear flood. With those waves wash, and then embalm each thorough cleansed limb. With our ambrosia each performed, divine weeds put on him. And then to those swift mates entwines, sweet sleep and death commit. Its princely person, that with speed they both may carry it, to wealthy Lycia, where his friends and brothers will embrace, and tomb it in some monument, as fits a prince of place. Then flew Apollo to the flight from the Idalian hill, at all parts putting into act his great commander's will, drew all the darts, washed, balmed the course, decked with ornament by sleep and death. Those feathered twins he into Lycia sent. Patroclus then Automedon commands to give his steeds large reins, and all the way to chase so madly he exceeds the strict commission of his friends, which had kept a black death from him. But Jove's mind hath evermore outstepped the mind of man, who both affrights and takes the victory from any hardiest hand with ease, which he can justify, though he himself commands him fight, as now he puts the chase in Menethriades' mind. How much then weighs the grace, Patroclus, that Jove gives thee now in scolds, put with thy death of all these great and famous men, the honourable breath, of which Adrestus first he slew, and next Autonus, Ipistora and Perimus, Pilates, Elasus, swift Menelaus, Molius, all these were overthrown by him, and all else put in rout. And then proud Ilion had stooped beneath his glorious hand, he raged so with his lance, if Phoebus had not kept the tower and helped the Ilians, sustaining ill thoughts against the prince, thrice to the prominence of Troy's steep wall he bravely leaped. Thrice Phoebus thrust him thence, objecting his dazzling shield with his resistless hand. But fourthly, when like one heaven he would have stirred his stand, Apollo threatened him and said, Cease! Exceeds thy fate forward, Patroclus, to expunge with thy bold lance this state. Nor under great Achilles' power to thine superior far lies Troy's grave ruin. When spake Patroclus left that war, leaped far back, and his anger shunned. Hector detained his horse within Scian port, and in doubt to put his personal force amongst the rout, and turn their heads or shun in Troy the storm. Apollo, seeing the suspense, resumed the goodly form of Hector's uncle, Asius, the Phrygian Demus' son, who near the deep Sangarius had habitation. Being brother to the Trojan queen, and this his shape Apollo took, and asked of Hector why his spirit so clear the fight forsook, affirming 'twas unfit for him, and wished his forces war as much above his as they moved in an inferior sphere. He should with shame to him be gone, and so bade drive away against Patroclus to approve, if he that gave them day would give the glory of his death to his preferred lance. So left he him, and to the fight did his bright head advance, mixed with the multitude, and stirred foul tumult for the foe. Then Hector bade Cebriones put him on, himself let go all other Greeks within his reach, and only gave command to front Patroclus. He at him jumped down, his strong left hand javelin held, his right a stone marble sharp, and such as his large hand had power to grip, and gave its strength as much as he could lie to, nor stand long in fear of that huge man that made against him, but full on with his huge stone he ran, discharged and drave it twixt the brows of bold Cebriones, nor could the thick bone there prepared extenuate to the excess. But out it drave his strong broken arms, which in the dust fell down, and he dived after with conceit of diving, took the son of old Menetius, who thus played upon the other's bane. Heavens! Truth, this Trojan was a passing active man. With what exceeding ease he dives, as if he were within the fishy seas. This man alone could furnish cheer for 20 men, though 'twere a storm to leap out of a sail and gather oysters for them. All he does it here as well, and there are many such in Troy. Thus jested he so near his own grave death, and then made in to spoil the charioteer with such alliance, force, and fate as often ruining. Stalls of fat oxen gets at length a mortal wound to sting. As his soul, out of the ravenous breast, was so insolent, and so his life's bliss proves his bane. So deadly confident wert there Patroclus in pursuit of good Cebriones, to whose defence now Hector leaped. The opposite address. These masters of the cry in war now made was of the kind of two fierce kings of beasts, posed in strife about a hind, slain on the forehead of a hill, both sharp and hungry set, and to the curie never came, but like two deaths they met. Nor these two entertained less mind of mutual prejudice about the body close to which, when each had pressed for prize, Hector the head laid upon his hand, which once griped never could be forced from him. Patroclus upon the feed got hold, and he pinched with as sure a nail, so both stood tugging there, while all the rest made eager fight, grappled everywhere, and as east and south winds strive to make a lofty wood bow to their greatness, barky elms, wild ashes, beeches bowed, even to thy earth, whose thick arms the mighty vapours lie, and toss by turns all either way their leaves at random fly, boughs murmur, their bodies crack, and with perpetual din the sylvans falter, and the storms are never to begin. So raged the fight, and all from flight plucked her forgotten wings, while some still stuck, still new-winged shafts flew dancing from their strings. Huge stones sent after them did shake the shields about the course, who now in dust, soft forehead stretched, forgat his guiding horse. As long as Phoebus' turn, his wheels about the midst of heaven, so long the touch of either's darts the falls of both made even. But when his wain drew near the west, the Greeks past measure war, the abler soldier, and so swept the Trojans' tumult clear from off the body, out of which they drew the hurled-in darts, and from the shoulders striped his arms. Then to more such parts Patroclus turned his striving thoughts to do the Trojans ill. Thrice, like a god of war, he charged, his voice is horrible. Thrice 9 those 3 charges slew, but in the 4th assay, O then, Patroclus, showed thy last. The dreadful sun made way against that onset. Yet the prince discerned no deity. He kept the press so, and besides obscured his glorious eye with such felt darkness, and at his back he made a sudden stand, and twixt his neck and shoulders laid down right either hand, and blow so weighty that his eyes a giddy darkness took. From his head 3-plumed helm the bounding violence shook. Rung beneath the horse's hooves, and like a water spout was crushed together with the fall, the plumes that it set out, all spattered with black blood and dust. Whenever heretofore it was a capital offence to have dust of gore defile a triple feathered helm. On the head divine and youthful temples of their prince it used untouched to shine. Yet now Jove gave it Hector's hands, the other's death was near. Besides whose lost and filed helm his huge long weighty spear, well bound with iron, in his hand was shivered, and his shield fell from his shoulders to his feet, the baldric strewing the field. His turrets left him like the rest, and all this only done by great Apollo. Then his mind took in confusion. Vigorous knittings of his joints dissolved, and thus dismayed a Dardan, one of Panthus' sons, and one that overlaid all Trojans of his place with darts, swift footing, skill, and force, in noble horsemanship, and one that tumbled from their horse, one after other, 20 men. And when he did but learn the art of war, nay, when he first did in the field discern a horse, the chariot of his guide, this man with all these parts is named Euphorbus, comes behind, and twixt his shoulders darts forlorn Patroclus, who yet lived, and the other getting forth his javelin, took him to his strength, nor durst he stand the worth of thee, Patroclus. Though disarmed, who yet discomfited by Phoebus's and Euphorbus's wound and the red heap of the dead, he now too late shunned and retired. When Hector saw him yield, he knew he yielded with a wound. He scored the armored field, came close up to him, and both sides struck quite through with his lance. He fell, and his most weighty fall gave fit tune to his chance, for which all Greece extremely mourned. As a mighty strife about a little fount begins, and riseth to the life of some fell boar resolved to drink. When likewise to the spring a lion comes, alike disposed, the boar thirsts, and his king, both proud and both will serve and be served. Then the lion takes advantage of his sovereign strength. And the other fainting makes resign his thirst up with his blood. Patroclus so enforced, when he had forced so much brave life, was from his own divorced. And thus his great divorcer braved. Patroclus, thy conceit gave thee the aversion of our Troy. And to thy fleet afraid of Trojan ladies and their free lives put all in their bands by thee, but too much prizer of thyself, all these are propped by me. For these have my horse, stretched their hoofs. To this so long a war, and I, far best of Trojan arms, keep off from Troy as far, even to the last beam of my life, their necessary day. Here in place of us and ours, on thee shall vultures prey, poor wretch. Nor shall their might, or mighty friend, afford thee any aid. That gave thy parting much deep charge, and this perhaps he said, Marshal Patroclus, turn not face, nor see my fleet before the curates from great Hector's breast, all gilded with his gore, thou hew'st in pieces. Well, if thus vain were his far-stretched commands, as vain was thy heart to believe his words would lay in thy hands. He languished, and languishing replied, This proves thy glory worse than vain. That when two gods have given thy hands, what their powers did obtain, they conquering, they spoiling, me, both of my arms and mind. It being a work of ease for them, thy soul should be so blind to oversee their evident deeds. Take their powers to thee, when, if the powers of 20 had such dead to counter me, my lance had strewed the hearth. With them all thou only dost obtain a third place in my death, whom first a harmful hate hath slain, affected by Latona's son, second and first of men, Euphorbus. This one thing more concerns thee. Note it then, thou shalt not long survive thyself. Nay, now death calls for thee. In violent fate, Achilles' lance shall make this good for me. Thus death, joined to his words his end, his soul took instant wing. To the house that hath no lights to send, sorrowing. For his sad fate, to leave him young, and in his ablest age, he dead, yet Hector asked him why, in that prophetic rage, he so forspake him, when none knew but great Achilles might prevent his death, and on his lance receive his latest light. Thus setting on his side his foot, he drew out of his wound his brazen lance, and upwards cast the body on the ground. And quickly, while the dart was hot, he charged Automedon, divine guide of Achilles' steeds in great contention, to seize him too, but his so swift and deathless horse that fetched their gift to Peleus from the gods, so wrapped him from his reach.